I've always been drawn to the ocean. As a kid, I'd spend hours watching documentaries, mesmerized by the vast, endless blue, wondering what mysteries lay hidden beneath its surface. It wasn't long before I knew I wanted to be a marine biologist. Not for the glory of discovery or fame, but simply because the ocean felt like the one place where the world was still untamed, where real adventure could still be found. Of course, as someone with a scientific mind, I never gave much weight to the myths. Stories of sea monsters, krakens, and mermaids were just that, stories. I'd heard them all, tales passed down through generations of sailors who spent too much time staring into the abyss. The idea of mermaids, in particular, always amused me. Beautiful women with fish tails, luring sailors to their doom? It seemed far too whimsical to take seriously. Still, there was something about those stories that always piqued my curiosity. Maybe it was the way they persisted across cultures, across centuries. Maybe it was because, deep down, even the most rational part of me wanted to believe there was still some magic left in the world. But I always brushed it off, chalking it up to humanity's need for wonder. When I got the chance to join a remote research expedition to a part of the ocean barely touched by human hands, I didn't hesitate. It was supposed to be a routine study of marine life in uncharted waters, cataloging species, mapping the seabed, all the usual stuff. But from the moment we arrived, things felt different. The ocean here wasn't like anywhere I'd been before. It was quieter, eerily so. The water was darker, thicker, almost as if it had a mind of its own. And the creatures we encountered, well, they weren't in any textbook I'd ever read. Strange, misshapen fish with glowing eyes, massive schools of jellyfish that pulsed in perfect sync, as if they were responding to something unseen. I told myself it was just a consequence of being in such an isolated part of the world, that we were simply witnessing the effects of evolution in an environment untouched by human interference. But as the days went on, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It wasn't just the creatures. It was the way the water felt against my skin when I dove, the way the waves seemed to whisper at night when the wind died down. Little things, barely noticeable, but enough to make me uneasy. Still, I did what any scientist would do. I rationalized. The strange animals were just examples of deep-sea biodiversity, and the eerie atmosphere was the result of being isolated for so long. But deep down I knew something wasn't right, and the deeper we went, the more unsettling it became. It was the fourth night at sea when I first heard it, the sound that would change everything. It started out faint, almost imperceptible, just a low hum carried on the breeze. At first, I thought it was just the wind playing tricks on me, a whistle through the rigging, maybe a distant whale song echoing across the water. But then it grew louder, clearer, and I realized it wasn't the wind. It was singing. The melody was unlike anything I'd ever heard before. Haunting, almost mournful, yet strangely beautiful. It was as if the ocean itself was calling out, drawing me in. I stood on the deck, frozen, listening as the sound seemed to rise from the depths below. It was hypnotic, each note pulling me closer to the edge of the boat, my pulse quickening with every step. I knew I should turn back, call it a night and retreat to the safety of the cabin, but I couldn't. There was something in that song, something ancient, something that whispered promises of secrets long forgotten. I leaned over the side of the boat, peering into the inky black water below, straining to see the source of the sound. My heart was racing now, my breath shallow, as if the song had wrapped itself around me, tightening its grip with each passing second. And then I saw it. At first, it was just a shadow, a ripple beneath the surface. But as it drew closer, I could make out a figure, a shape that was disturbingly human-like. My brain struggled to make sense of what I was seeing. It moved gracefully through the water, its pale skin almost glowing in the moonlight. But something was wrong. The body was elongated, unnatural, the limbs too long, the head tilted at an odd angle, its eyes too wide. For a brief moment, it surfaced, just enough for me to catch a glimpse. I wish I hadn't. Its face, if you could even call it that, was twisted, grotesque, a nightmarish parody of what I had always imagined a mermaid might look like. The eyes were large, black, and void of any emotion. Its mouth was wide, filled with sharp, glistening teeth, as if it were smiling, but not in any way that conveyed warmth. I stumbled back, my heart pounding in my chest, but my gaze was locked on the water, waiting for it to reappear. But it was gone. As quickly as it had surfaced, it vanished into the depths, leaving nothing but the still, dark water in its wake. The singing had stopped, replaced by a deafening silence that pressed in on me from all sides. I stood there, trembling, my mind racing to rationalize what I had just seen. Had it been real? Or was it just a trick of the light, my tired mind conjuring up shapes and shadows? But deep down I knew I had seen something. Something that defied explanation. Something that wasn't supposed to exist. Fascination and horror churned inside me, a mix of emotions I couldn't shake. Part of me wanted to dive in, to chase after whatever it was, to know more. But another part, the rational part, screamed at me to turn away, to forget what I'd seen, to leave this place before it was too late. But the song still lingered in my mind, a haunting echo that I couldn't escape. I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd seen, or, rather, what I thought I'd seen. The grotesque figure, the haunting song, it gnawed at me even when I wasn't at sea. I told myself I needed answers, that it was a matter of scientific curiosity, but in reality, it was something darker, something more primal. I needed to know. I couldn't let it go. So I started diving deeper. I prepared meticulously, convincing the crew it was part of our regular exploration. Every day, I'd venture farther into the water, searching, hoping to catch another glimpse of the creature. At first, it was just the usual sights, exotic fish, corals, the deep, expansive blue, but then things began to change. The first sign that something was wrong came in the form of a carcass. I found it floating aimlessly in the water, a large fish with deep, jagged wounds across its body. At first, I thought it had been attacked by a shark, but the cuts were too clean, too precise. I examined it closely, noting the strange, almost deliberate patterns. It was as though something had toyed with it, slicing it apart for sport rather than survival. As I went deeper, I found more, larger animals, torn apart in the same gruesome fashion. Dolphins, rays, even sharks. All mutilated, their bodies marked by the same strange, deliberate cuts. The water was becoming darker, thicker, as if the ocean itself was warning me to turn back. But I didn't. I couldn't. And then I saw them. It started with a flicker of movement in the distance, just beyond the reach of my light. I followed it, my pulse quickening, adrenaline surging through my veins. The water around me grew colder, and the light from the surface began to fade, but I kept going, diving deeper into the abyss. They appeared out of the darkness like shadows, at first just shapes moving gracefully through the water, circling me. There were 3, maybe 4. It was hard to tell, the way they moved so quickly, so fluidly. My heart was racing, my mind screaming at me to retreat, but I was transfixed. When they came closer, I realized with a sickening jolt that these were no creatures of folklore. They were twisted, predatory, nothing like the enchanting mermaids of legend. Their bodies were long and sleek, covered in dark, oily scales that shimmered with an almost iridescent hue. Their faces, oh God, their faces, were monstrous, a perverse mockery of human features. Hollow black eyes, too wide and too deep, stared at me with a kind of malevolent curiosity. Their mouths, lined with rows of razor-sharp teeth, curled into grotesque smiles as they circled me. I wanted to swim away, but I couldn't move. My muscles locked in place, paralyzed by fear. The water around me felt thicker, like it was pressing in on me, weighing me down. And then I heard it again, the singing. It wasn't beautiful anymore. It was cold, mocking, vibrating through the water and into my skull, clouding my thoughts, wrapping around me like a vice. I watched in horror as one of the creatures darted forward, its long, skeletal fingers brushing against my leg, cold as ice. It didn't attack, at least not yet. It was playing with me, like a predator toying with its prey. I realized then what they were. These weren't the romanticized beings of sailor myths. They were hunters, luring their victims with their hypnotic song, drawing them closer until it was too late. Suddenly, one of them swam toward me with terrifying speed, stopping just inches from my face. Its wide, black eyes locked onto mine, and I felt a cold terror unlike anything I had ever experienced. I knew in that moment that they didn't just kill, they enjoyed it. They reveled in the fear, in the agony, in the helplessness of their prey. With every ounce of strength I had left, I forced myself to swim upward, my lungs burning, my mind screaming, the song still echoing in my ears. They didn't follow. They didn't have to. They had planted something inside me, an overwhelming, inescapable terror that would never leave. I surfaced gasping for air, but I knew I had barely escaped. And they were still down there, waiting. I tried to tell them. The morning after my escape, I stumbled onto the deck, still shaken, still gasping for air, desperate to explain what I had seen. My colleagues listened at first, their expressions shifting from concern to confusion, then disbelief. I recounted everything, the mutilated animals, the grotesque figures, the eerie singing that echoed in my mind even now. But no one believed me. Stress, they said. Fatigue from too many dives. I could see it in their eyes, the way they exchanged glances, the way they tried to comfort me with their empty reassurances. They thought I was losing it, and maybe I was. But I knew what I had seen, what I had felt. The ocean was hiding something terrible, something ancient, something predatory. And I was the only one who knew. So I stopped trying to convince them. Instead, I became obsessed. I needed proof, something undeniable that would force them to see the truth. I started diving alone, at night, when the rest of the crew was asleep. Each time I went deeper, pushing myself to the limits, hoping to encounter the creatures again. But no matter how deep I went, they never appeared. At least, not at first. It began slowly, subtly. I would hear the faintest hint of that song, just beneath the surface of the water, even when I wasn't diving. I could be standing on the deck, staring out at the horizon, and I'd hear it, a soft, lulling hum that only I seemed to notice. It would drift through the air like a ghost, impossible to ignore. The others would carry on with their duties, oblivious, while I stood there, frozen, wondering if I was the only one hearing it. Soon, the shadows started appearing. Flickers of movement just beyond the edges of my vision. At first, I thought it was just my mind playing tricks on me, a side effect of diving so deep into the ocean's abyss. But the shadows grew more persistent. I'd see them everywhere, darting beneath the water's surface, lurking in the corners of the boat, even appearing in my cabin late at night. Every time I turned to look, they'd vanish, slipping away just before I could make sense of them. Sleep became impossible. The line between dreams and reality started to blur. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, convinced I could hear the song through the thin walls of my cabin. Sometimes, I'd wake to the sensation of cold fingers brushing against my skin, but when I turned on the light, there was nothing. Just the silence, thick and suffocating, broken only by the sound of my own ragged breathing. The worst part was the water. It had changed. Every time I dove now, it felt different. Heavier. Darker. I could feel the pressure, not just physically, but mentally. The deeper I went, the more it seemed to warp my perception. Colors bled into each other, shapes twisted and elongated in ways that defied logic. The ocean was distorting itself, becoming something alien, something hostile. And the song, God, that song, grew louder. It echoed through the water, vibrating in my bones, making it impossible to think. I started hearing it even when I was on land, miles from the ocean. It followed me everywhere, like a shadow I couldn't shake. At first, I thought it was in my head, but I was wrong. They were watching me, hunting me. They had marked me the moment I saw them, and now they were waiting, wearing me down. I began to question everything. Was I still dreaming? Was I still sane? I'd stare at my reflection in the porthole, watching my own eyes, wondering if they belonged to me or to something else, something they had claimed. My colleagues noticed the change in me, the way I avoided them, the way I refused to leave the water, how my eyes grew hollow and distant. They thought I was losing myself to obsession. But it wasn't obsession. It was fear. Fear that I was already too far gone, that no matter how much I fought it, the song would never leave me. Fear that the ocean wasn't the only thing that had changed, that I had changed too. That maybe I didn't want to escape. Maybe, deep down, I wanted to hear the song again, to let it take me. The truth was simple. Yet terrifying, I was no longer in control. The creatures had me, mind and soul, and soon I wouldn't be able to fight them off any longer. I don't know how it all spiraled so fast. One moment I was standing on the deck, staring out at the moonlit water, and the next, I was drowning. I remember the pull, a sharp tug on my ankle that sent me crashing overboard. There was no time to react, no time to scream. The cold water swallowed me whole, the weight of it dragging me deeper, faster than I thought possible. I thrashed wildly, struggling against the invisible force pulling me under, but it was useless. The ocean had me now, and so did they. Their song echoed all around me, vibrating through the water and into my skull. It wasn't just sound anymore. It was inside me, twisting my thoughts, blurring my senses. I couldn't tell which way was up, which way was out. Every kick, every stroke felt like I was moving farther into the abyss, away from the surface, away from safety. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. All I could hear was the song, growing louder and louder until it consumed everything. I saw them then, circling me, their grotesque forms undulating through the water like serpents. They didn't attack right away. No, they were patient, watching me with those wide, black eyes, their sharp teeth glistening in the murky depths. They were toying with me, savoring my panic, my helplessness. And I knew, with a sickening clarity, that this had been their plan all along. Their songs weren't just to lure their prey. They were far more insidious than that. The singing wasn't a call, it was a weapon, a psychological invasion. It wormed its way into the mind, distorting reality, driving the victim into madness before they ever laid a hand or claw on them. It wasn't enough for them to simply kill. No, they fed on fear, on the slow, creeping unraveling of sanity. I could feel it happening to me. My thoughts no longer felt like my own. I could barely remember why I had dived so deep, why I had sought them out. My vision flickered, the shadows twisting into shapes I couldn't comprehend. Was I even still underwater? Was this all some kind of dream, a hallucination? I couldn't tell anymore. But through the haze, through the confusion and terror, something inside me snapped. Some primal instinct, the will to survive, kicked in, and I started thrashing again, fighting with everything I had left. One of them darted toward me, its claws reaching for my throat, but I kicked out, connecting with its chest. It recoiled, startled, and for a brief moment, I broke free of the song's hold. I swam. I swam harder than I ever had in my life, my lungs burning, my limbs screaming in agony. The surface seemed impossibly far, but I didn't stop. I could hear them behind me, feel their presence just out of reach, but I didn't dare look back. I knew if I did, I wouldn't make it. My head broke the surface, and I gasped for air, pulling myself onto the deck with the last ounce of strength I had. I collapsed, coughing, my body trembling uncontrollably. For a moment, everything was quiet. No singing, no shadows, just the sound of my own ragged breathing and the gentle lapping of the waves against the boat. But I knew it wasn't over. They were still there, just beneath the surface, watching, waiting. I could feel them. The song wasn't as loud anymore, but it was still there, lingering at the edge of my mind, a constant reminder that I hadn't truly escaped. I'm scarred now, physically, mentally. The nightmares come every night, and sometimes, I swear I still hear their voices, calling to me from the depths. I know they're not done with me, and maybe they never will be. But I've survived. For now. And I'm telling you this because you need to know. You need to understand that everything you've heard, all those beautiful, enchanting tales of mermaids, are lies. They're not what you think. They're predators. Manipulative. Patient. They'll lure you in with their beauty, with their songs, and by the time you realize the truth, it'll be too late. So, please, if you ever hear singing out at sea, no matter how alluring, how beautiful, don't follow it. Don't listen. Turn back. Because they're out there. And they're waiting.